Well, you know that I've wanted to do this show for a minute because it's such a tricky thing navigating the language around the LGBTQ community. And as you know, obviously, both of us, it's something that you stood up for so hugely in your life. And it's something that I embrace so much in my life and that we both feel so passionately about. Yet how can the two of us who feel this way still find ourselves stumbling around the language? And the irony of it is that we were people growing up in the 80s and 90s that fought for it when it was really hard. When it was, I remember walking through the streets with my gay friends in the 80s and 90s and getting mean looks and people being, horrible to us. And what you did was just monumental. And so now if we find ourselves in a conversation using the wrong word and upsetting somebody, it's almost like, God, you don't know what we went through.
Right.
We were here when it was
fought
really
for you
hard.
to be confusing.
We fought for you to be here. So give us a minute, okay? Like we're 100,000% with you, but just give us a minute to catch up because it's gotten as far as we could have possibly hoped for.
Well,
in our wildest dreams, we couldn't have hoped that it would get as far as it's gone, and it's fucking awesome.
Yes.
But
now what? And that's what we do.
We got to understand all of this terminology.
So happy Pride, and this is what we are celebrating. Pride is also education. It's evolution. We are evolving, and Levi, our teacher, our master, and our guide, is going to be the beginning of Heather and me, and hopefully you. Opening up, reminding ourselves again that curiosity is the thing. It's okay to be curious about what's going on. It's ours to seek the knowing and the learning. And that's what we have for you today. It's going to be so much fun to listen to Levi. You're going to learn a lot.
We're better together with Ann and Heather.
So then we just have to jump into it.
We just jump in. I'm so excited. We're so excited to have you, Levi. We've been wanting to do this show for so long. Yes. And this show is really for the lovers and supporters of everybody. I'm calling it right now under the rainbow until Levi teaches us the proper terminology, which is what this show is about. Yep. Because we want it to be for everybody, for the lovers and the supporters. It's not intended to be to talk people into using the proper terminology and the importance behind it, because we all know the importance behind showing support for those people we love and care about, and supporting their journey into being their true selves, because that is something that obviously Anne has stood up for in a big way her entire life. So we're so happy to have you and to learn from you and to have you teach us.
Please educate us. This is what today is all about, learning from a master about what we need to know.
And I think the place to begin is what I just said, where, I'm referring to it as everybody under the rainbow. How, when I'm talking about the entire community, let's start there.
Please.
Okay, so I feel like this under the rainbow is such a broad term because we're under this umbrella of under the rainbow. We have different identities regarding different things, right? We have gender identity, which transgender or cisgender people. And then we also have sexual identities like gay or lesbian or queer or bisexual. So it's this very broad thing that is beyond just like, this is all about who someone falls in love with, right? There's a whole lot of other people that are kind of interwoven into this rainbow. And it may not be about their sexual attraction. It could just be about their gender identity. And we know that gender identity is really just about how a person feels. And it seems like a lot of the discussion around gender identity right now centers in around pronouns specifically, because some people prefer to use they, them pronouns, which, although a lot of people don't think this is the case, they can be used as singular pronouns, just like he, him, or she, her. It's just a language, I guess, barrier where people aren't used to using them in those ways, but they can be, and it's still grammatically correct. In fact, you've probably done it for people who identify using he, him, or she, her pronouns, but that in certain contexts, you might say like, oh, they did it, it's over there. Something like that, right? You might use that language. But it does seem like the hard part for people is adopting language just around someone's expression.
It's not as comfortable as identifying someone with a name because that's our habit. And we're not used to, we're not used to this and want to help people understand how to do it. Even to the point where when you say a transsexual and using that language and putting sex in the middle of that. And I think that's very confusing to identify that way as a child. I mean, children shouldn't be identified with the word sex in the middle of
I don't even know if that's
gender.
allowed. Is it transgender or I don't even know if transsexual is a thing anymore.
I don't. That's what you tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. So even that has been really phased out. It's more like a medical term, right? Like the word homosexual is rooted in the medical psychology community. And so is the word transsexual. Now, some people may say, I'm a proud transsexual. And for that person, that's their identity, right? And you can still respect that. And if someone said like, oh, they're transgender, you would say like, no, they identify as transsexual. That's because some people do still identify using those terms or using homosexual. And that's fine for their individual identity. But in terms of talking about people in a broader sense, transgender is the term, really, because it's about gender expression, not anything really sexual, right? Because gender and sex are two different things. You could be biologically, your sex is male, but still you identify as a trans woman, and maybe you're transitioning or maybe you're not. You identify as a trans woman, so you are a woman. That's kind of how that plays out, right? It's really more about how people feel and respecting their feelings, their identity, to give them that validation. It would be the same as if like, every time someone encountered Heather or Anne, and every time you're on set, everyone said like, oh, Anne, he's over there. Eventually, you'd be like, I'm not a man. Does everyone know this? Like, I'm not a man. I don't use those pronouns. My pronouns are she, her, right? So it's the same thing, right? It's just accepting someone for who their identity is and then respecting it and doing your best to use those, their preferred name, preferred pronouns, whatever the things are that really validate who they are as an individual. And it can be tricky. I mean, even I had to practice it. I think as more people were identifying with using the pronouns they, them, using it in a sentence can be challenging, right? But if you really think about it, it breaks down fairly easily. And actually, there's a great video on TikTok from Addison Rose Vincent, who is non-binary and an activist. And it's about 60 seconds long, but it's a great explainer in which they kind of inform how to use it. And it comes out super simple when they do it. It's very much like, oh, that's Heather. They use they, them pronouns. It's not that hard. Once you start interchanging they with, he and them with him, it kind of starts to flow a little bit better. And I think it's just because we're not used to doing it. And when people aren't used to doing things, it's hard. And then they don't want to offend people. But I think even that causes more issues because most people, it's not even about nailing it every time. Like you want to nail it every time because that's what you would do for any other person. But at the same time, it's making that cognizant effort to care enough about someone that you've met or that you interact with all the time that who just prefers to use those pronouns, that you do it, if that makes sense. Like, I know that sounds weird to just do it because it's hard, but I think it's something that with just a smidgen of practice is easily adoptable.
You're kind of speaking about when some people say I'm really good with names or I'm not really, I forget everybody's name. It's thinking consciously how to do it and that it's normal.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that if you do have somebody in your life, that's, you make the effort and you find out. But even us just talking now, we said transsexual, not knowing that it is a term not used. So it's so easy. I guess the point is it's so easy to step into it now without knowing. So that's kind of what I want to solve here today. Like even when we talked about the broader term. So like the broader term, sometimes it's called.
Can I ask one question first? Because I think sometimes how do you approach a curiosity in a way that honors the person? I think that's part of it too. If we don't know and we're not in the context with them often, but we know that they would like to be identified some way, and the person that we want to identify isn't necessarily telling us right off the bat, is there a way to enter that conversation with respect?
I think that the safest bet, honestly, is to use a more neutral pronoun like they, them. I do that generally if I'm working with someone who, even if someone may present as very feminine or very masculine, they may not use a gendered pronoun like he, him, or she, her. So the safest bet is to revert to they, them, which I know Heather's like, oh Lord, because this is tricky, right? Like using it in a sentence.
Like I would be,
I'm surprised.
I would think
I'm
that
surprised
that's a
you say
very
that.
specific thing.
It is tricky.
I mean, I love this information. I think it's fantastic. I just would see. I wouldn't know that.
Right. I wouldn't because that's an assumption. And
I think that's
is the generalization around
Ryan's
they,
even blown away. I can tell by his.
I feel like the people that I know usually tell me up front if they're like, I go by they, them.
Yes. Often people do. It's becoming a thing, right? Like you see it, and I see it in Zoom, right? When I join a even class with school, right? I'll see like a person's name, Brian, he/him. So a lot of people are, even if they're not necessarily part of the queer community or the LGBTQ plus community, or they don't use, their preferred pronouns align more with their, I guess you'd say like societal presentation of gender. So most people do kind of tell you like, oh, I use they, them. And that first time, that's something that I don't generally worry about. Like I make an effort to know someone's pronouns, especially if that person puts it out there. Maybe they put it on their LinkedIn, in their email signature, in their Instagram profile. So then I make that effort. If someone doesn't put that information out there, and I don't feel like I can, I guess this is a bad way to say it, but like guess what pronouns they prefer, I try to use they, them. No one really corrects you for like they, them in the same way because it doesn't have a gender tie that they would he, him, or she, her if they identify with a different set of pronouns. Everyone uses pronouns, right? They're using those pronouns to convey gender information in a communicative way. That's how Heather uses it. If you say, oh no, my pronouns are she, her, that's telling the other person who's communicating with you a lot of information with literally 2 little words, right?
Well, tell me, what does that communicate? Just for people like, so she, her means that I communicate as what I would call in my old terminology, a straight woman.
I would say it's probably could be cisgender or transgender, right? So using she, her, you may be a lesbian and still use she, her, right?
Okay.
So really the information it's communicating is more so about gender identity and has really nothing to do with
sexuality.
Nothing to do with sex in any way.
See, that's
this clarification.
That's the clarification of it all.
Yes.
Okay.
What's next on your list there, lady?
If I said I'm cis, that means that I like dick.
Huh?
Right?
Cisgender doesn't. Cisgender just means that you identify with the gender you were assigned at birth. You're cisgender.
We still haven't gotten to dick.
Not yet. Not there yet.
Wow. She wants to get there really bad.
Okay.
We're still at gender, right?
Okay.
So you saying I'm cisgender, that means that you
I was born with female parts.
With female genitalia, and you align with that gender. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm a she, her, cis, full stop, cis. I just say cis.
You could say cisgender. Okay. I'd probably start with, if I'm Heather, I would say like, hi, I'm Heather. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm cisgender, right? Okay. That would be, I'm a cisgender woman. You can say that, or I'm a cis woman if you want to shorten it up a little bit.
Okay. And then what? Then where do we get to the sexuality? AKA the dick.
Okay, so then the sexuality part, you might, so if I'm actually being you and I'm introducing myself as you, I'm Heather, my pronouns are she, her, I'm a cisgender straight woman.
Okay.
Or I'm a cisgender, however you identify.
And I like dick. Okay.
No.
My pronouns are she, her. That tells them a lot. Okay. This person identifies as a woman. I'm cisgender. That means I was born with the genitalia that is, more societally associated with the gender that I align with.
Okay.
And on top of that, I'm straight. So I'm probably in a relationship with a man, or I'm interested, in the opposite sex, or maybe someone.
And in the same way, we don't say homosexual, we don't say heterosexual anymore.
I think that people are getting away from that and using straight because it's heterosexual, homosexual. All of those are very medically rooted in terms of like psychological terms. That it was back when queerness was really more of like a psychological disorder, I guess is how it was perceived by the medical community. So those are those medical terms, right?
Well, I mean, I just have to say how incredible it is to note the difference now. There has been change and growth. Identifying the way that you're talking about what you align with and announcing it, saying it with pride is something we did not do 20 years ago.
Well, now that we've broken me down, what would Anne be?
Sister.
Well, no, because Anne, you've said that you've described yourself as, well, by mistake, you would say you're sexually liquid, but then she said she's sexually fluid.
No, somebody called me sexually fluid and I got it wrong.
I know, and you called yourself sexually liquid, but somebody who's a little more fluid than I.
Well, I was doing a podcast actually, and they said, well, you were the first sexually fluid person, and it had changed their way of looking at things. And then I was retelling that story, and I said it was sexually liquid.
But like, what would you identify as? What would be your what would you be?
Well, I say I'm a he, she because first of all, it's my last name, and everybody pronounces it that way, and my real last name is H. So if you put the C two ways, it's a he, she. If the C goes upside down. And I like that because I stand up for the right to choose to love who you want to love regardless of gender. And I feel like that's...
But I bet there's a label for that already.
Yes, so let's... is there?
For gender expression, if you're talking about gender expression or finding, in a romantic...
She's talking about that I was with a woman. I do not think that gender is the thing that I would look at to choose who I fall in love with or have sex with. However, since Ellen and I have not had sex with another woman, and she was the first woman I had sex with. So
I think you identify... you speak for yourself, but I think your gender, you identify as a woman. Do you feel any man gender?
I feel that we are all combined gender. That's what an egg and sperm are. So we have the capability to identify with the male and the female in us. I just think that that's the freedom we have. So I don't know. I don't know what that is. I do not identify as a man. No, but I identify some masculine qualities within myself. And I don't know. I would be open to another woman. I just haven't been yet.
Probably sexually fluid or pansexual is, when you're talking specifically about sex, and then in terms of gender, maybe gender fluid or non-binary, I think all of the terms kind of depends on the person, right? How they prefer to, what terms they use to label themselves, because that's kind of also getting back to like the respect element of gender expression and identity, and asking people about their pronouns. One thing I did want to mention is that, like, we talk about, I said like my preferred pronouns are he, him, me personally. A lot of trans people don't use the term preferred pronouns because it implies that there was a choice in who they actually are as a person and aligning with that, right? So there's a lot of, I guess you'd say, nuances to how to communicate with many different types of people, not just, in the LGBTQ plus community, but many different identities of people who identify in lots of different ways. So there are things like that to keep in mind as well, as like a trans person was always a woman, like a trans woman in particular, I'm using as an example, was always a woman, was born a woman, did not align with the sex they were assigned at birth, but so their gender expression is as a woman. That's probably as I said, like deciding what pronouns to use. If you don't feel comfortable asking someone their preferred pronouns or what their pronouns are, however you want to word that to them, usually just using the pronoun that aligns the most closely with how that person expresses themselves is generally a safe bet. Obviously, they, them is always a great option because it's very neutral. You can use it for anyone. People do use it for anyone. Like, I'm sure I've said, like, about my mom, she just put a bunch of stuff in storage for my grandmother. Oh, I know they did it. They put it in there, right? Who am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about my mom. She did it. She put it in there, but they worked fine too. So I used it, Right. And it's not like I'm not gendering my mom in any way beyond they, them, right? I'm using those pronouns to identify them. So I think there is a lot of nuance, and there's a lot of education that has to be done. Even for myself, thinking about it, like I just at the moment thought like, I should mention that preferred pronouns is not always the best way to ask someone to communicate to them, like, what pronouns do you use?
Implying the choice.
Because you're implying the word choice with the use preference, right? So even that is it's more nuanced, right?
Right.
So,
it's interesting that you're bringing it up because this is the exact difference between what Ellen and I spoke about 20 years ago. She was standing up for the understanding and identification of being born gay. And I was standing up for the choice to be with whomever I wanted to be with, regardless of gender. So it's interesting that you're talking about preference here. What is your point of view on preference or choice?
So I think a lot of that like even saying like, what's your sexual preference is really not something people say anymore, because it implies that you made a choice to, I made this choice that I'm preferring this, when it's more of a natural, like intrinsic attraction, I guess you'd say.
But is it not a choice though to continue with that attraction? I'm confused by this question, because I feel like choice is our number one superpower, and empowerment to be able to say, yes, I continue to choose this because it's what I want and what I feel. And we're talking about being born in a different way than we necessarily look. However, the choice we make every day is our power. I feel like, so I question why we don't want to embrace that power by saying, yes, it's a preference because I didn't identify with how I was born, but I do choose every day to live in that truth.
I think that the choice in there lies in, you may make a choice to be in a relationship with someone or an individual. You make a choice to have sex with someone, right? Those are choices.
Got it.
But that's different.
Yeah, that's a good-
than,
Yes, that's really interesting.
does that
Yeah.
make sense? Like,
It
Yeah,
does.
totally.
It completely makes sense. It clarifies for me. That's a very clear understanding. I think that's.
but like in
terrific.
your brain, you never I'm assuming there was never a day when you were like, today I'm going to choose to find Ellen DeGeneres attractive. I'm going to choose that
Yeah.
right now. That part happened. You did make a choice to be in a relationship with
Yes.
that person, but you didn't make a choice to say like, choosing right now, finding you attractive. That part is the natural, intrinsic element of just like being human, right? You found this because of your genetic makeup or your biologic makeup or your psychology. You find this person attractive, but you don't choose it, right? Or that person or whatever person you find attractive.
Well, I mean, I think that's what Heather was trying to get at, because that is an interesting moment. I literally did choose to be completely okay with whatever was going to happen, because yes, I was attracted to that, but it was a very specific choice for me. However, I completely understand with gender identity, and I'm really trying to get this language. It's so good to have this conversation.
It is.
I completely get what you're talking about in those terms, and being able to state for a fact how you were born. It was not what you necessarily looked like to your parents. And that is not a choice, but where your actions that you enjoy furthering with that is the choice. That's really cool.
Yeah. We were talking earlier, it's not just a straight thing, because I was talking to friends of mine that I was saying earlier. I mean, I call them old-fashioned gays, because it's just from the old-fashioned 80s gays, like we're from a different time. And when I was telling them we were doing the show, they're like, they didn't understand. They don't know any of the language either.
Right.
This was back.
You guys are young.
When we didn't have the language. So like,
Well, it wasn't okay to have the language. I mean, we were straight, or that was it. There was one or the
you
other.
were either straight
and we were afraid of it,
or you were gay. There was nothing in between. And like, they would use words back then, like, they have a different lifestyle. Like that was a word that they would use back then. Like we would never, I assume that's dead. Like, I have common sense about certain things. Like, you would never refer to that as somebody's lifestyle, for God's sakes. But that's what they used to. That's what they used to
were
say.
Hiding. They were it was a cover. Everything was a cover. And that's her aunt or her sister's visiting from Cleveland. If the kids asked.
But yeah, so it's an age thing. For people like us, it's not a straight thing. It's an age.
Well, and that's part of why the furthering of the needle that we talk about, it's really interesting, because of course now there's a plethora of language and this that we get to learn from, but you're right that we need the education.
And also learning to be like things that you wouldn't normally think of, like when you start a speech that says, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, like things like that we really need to
like
readdress.
What would you say?
And think about,
Yeah, a good example of that is the Disney theme parks, which I know Disney right now is kind of in a heated scandal with their support of the Don't Say Gay bill in Florida. But I was last year or the year before where they changed that like iconic ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, that like announcement that the Disneyland parks had, where they changed that to be more inclusive of everyone.
And now
you
they're
say
supporting.
I've got some. I looked them up. Esteemed guests, friends and colleagues.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay, that's the inclusive.
Yeah.
The big under the rainbow. That's the new language. Well, wait a minute. Did I hear you correctly? Disney is getting behind the bill.
No, for God's sakes, no.
Disney. I don't know.
No.
I asked if I heard wrong.
I don't have all the details. What it was that Disney had made donations to certain political campaigns in large amounts of money that eventually supported the Don't Say Gay bill. And by eventually, I mean like within a fairly short amount of time. So basically, there's a movement right now to hold these really large companies more accountable for their donations. And actually, Abigail Disney went on a huge rant on Twitter.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's actually pretty fascinating when you dig in there to see what's going on. But yeah, it's just companies being held more accountable.
Let's talk about just quickly, for those that don't know that might be listening, what the Don't Say Gay bill. It passed in Florida, and it forbids instruction on sexual orientation and gender identity in kindergarten and third grade. And it now moves to that lovely Governor Ron DeSantis's desk, who's expected to pass it into law. And it is it forbids preschool teachers and through third grade to give any instruction or and the idea that preschool, kindergarten, first grade teachers are turning children
they're allowed to tell
is ludicrous. I mean, we could do an entire show on that, but True. I think that people should just be aware of the idiocy of such a bill, and that this kind of bullshit is still going on.
And I know I called Disney out, and I know that I believe Chapek did reach out to the governor of Florida and express that the Walt Disney Company was concerned about the legislation becoming law and that it would unfairly target LGBTQ plus people. But the real thing there is that they already did support it, right? So that's where the backlash is coming from, is like, but you've already supported it. Now, are they going to make changes? Well, I hope so, because I mean, I think a lot of people love the Disney brand, and they, seemingly are responding to the backlash. So put that out there because I did call them out, but.
Well, good on you. I'm curious about the other states that they're saying are going to jump on board if this passes. Isn't it like 9 to whatever? There's like support going through other communities for this. What's your take on that?
I know Idaho is passing legislation that I'm not sure if it's the same as the Don't Say Gay bill, but I know it has to do with trans youth being offered any sorts of medical treatments, and that being illegal for minors moving forward. Is that essentially transgender teens will be denied any sort of gender affirming treatments or medical procedures or things like that until, I believe, they have to be adults. I think that's what it is. It basically criminalizes medical treatments for trans youth, in a summary. So that's happening in Idaho right now. There are a lot of things happening in various states. And
criminalizes their parents and criminalizes same-sex couples and they're not allowed to talk about their parents. It's so devastating. I would love to know what your point of view on how we're talking about communication and education. How do we fight this? What do we do? And is your point of view on why this is happening and how this could continue to happen?
I think a lot of legislators are using a very specific, I guess you'd say, like fear in maybe parents who are cisgender and straight and living in a nuclear family. But it basically is creating this boogeyman in which you plant the seed to those parents that like, oh, these teachers are teaching sex to pre-K through third graders, which is really not happening, right? Like I definitely, in my experience, I mean, it was a long time ago, but pre-K through third grade. None of that ever happens, right? But that's what they're using as this weapon to kind of make it like, we need this law to protect your kids. Otherwise, the teachers could be talking about gay sex in class. And it's like, what second grade teacher is doing that?
Exactly. Well, it goes back to having sex. And why are kids even talking? Why are we talking about our kids about sex when they're in kindergarten and even having that conversation?
Well, I think it goes back to...
So that's how they're getting that law.
Yeah. It goes back to what we're talking about today is acceptance and making this language mainstream. I think that scares the shit out of people, is making this normalizing something that's,
well, they have to think about others and what others would like to identify as.
And they think that by doing that, their kid, it's going to turn their child gay because it's served up to them on a platter and it's right there for them, which is ridiculous. So anyway, back to I mean, like I said, we could go on. We could go on for days. So
we could. But we wanted to start with, and we've talked about really addressing a question, and you have done that here. And how do we help, and what do we do to?
But I still have my question of how do we? What is the umbrella? Well, two questions, a couple of questions still I have. One is, how do we address the umbrella community? And then my next question is the word queer. We say the word queer, and I know that the queer community has kind of, I mean, I know that historically the word queer started out was from the 1500s and meant odd and strange. Yeah. And then I know that the queer, it was taken over by what we now refer to as the queer community many, many, many years ago.
Well, the march was, we're here, we're queer, get used to it.
Well, no, I know, but I think it was taken over even before that.
Yes.
And kind of taken as our own. I say our own because I always,
the weirdos. What?
No. I mean, for the gay community, I can't. Again, do you see me stumbling?
That's why we're having this conversation.
Do you see me stumbling with how to refer to it all? And so,
but this is not going to be our only conversation about this, because what we want to do is help create habit.
But anyways, the history of the word queer is fascinating because it started out meaning that, and then the queer community took it over, and now it's a prideful word, but still part of. Anyways, take it away on queer.
Yeah, I mean that's something that we actually see a lot of in overseeing just kind of the larger social media communities that my company oversees, at LGBT on Instagram, things like that, platforms like that. When we use those words, a lot of time we'll get feedback from the older generation that the word is hateful, that it's a slur, that they were called that on the playground, and it's hurtful to them. And that is one of those words that's kind of been reclaimed by the LGBTQ plus community in this way that it was it was a weaponized word, and now it is an identity or a label that a lot of people embrace. And actually, Will Sterling, who was the original producer of my podcast, recently came out as queer. And that is a term that before, I mean, kids would say oh, he's queer as a $2 bill. It was an insult, right? But it has been reclaimed. And it is one of those things that it's hard because you have certain people from a certain era in which things were done a certain way. Even like you said, I think you called them the old gays.
The old-fashioned gays.
Yeah, the old-fashioned gays. The acronym was LGBT. And so LGBTQ plus, or any of those identities that are encompassed in the plus.
Is that appropriate to say? LGBT.
Well, by the way, queer is a $2 bill. Queer used to be that's what they referred to counterfeit as, queer. It was it's actually just a little
I like it. I
little
love
nugget
it.
there.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah, I would say that even question. I mean, LGBTQ. I guess some people would argue the Q is questioning, the Q is queer. But that the word queer has definitely been reclaimed recently, and many people do embrace it. But again, that comes back to someone's personal feelings towards something, right? Like you mentioned using the word transsexual. If someone identifies as that, then you would respect that. And if that's how they identify, you would use that to describe them if that's how they wanted to be described, right? Because something about that resonates with them and they embrace it. And so you should too, out of respect for them. Although, most people do not.
And it does have to do with generation and the gaps and the growth of language and everything that we learn too, because it's really from whatever, like our old fashioned gays our age have the word queer, but there's always different words that change, and a 40-year-old would have maybe a different language than a 30-year-old right now, because this is new language. I mean, really. Are there words that have been, that one was weaponized and now reclaimed? Is there a word that is weaponized now? We're talking about definitions, and is there something that just has been reclaimed as a weapon, or a new weapon that we should be aware of that is hurtful?
I think the ones that now again, there are people that I know within the LGBTQ plus community who use these words to describe themselves, or they choose, these labels, this specific words like fag or dyke. There are people, there's an event in Palm Springs that this group of queer women, I think they're still doing it. It's called Dykes on Bikes. And I believe they're on motorcycles. Yeah. I'm not positive. I think that's it. But they've reclaimed that word. That's still, I would say, still an anti-LGBTQ term that probably like mainstream media, mainstream personalities would want to avoid, right? Yeah. If someone came on your show and was like, oh, I'm a fag, you would let them take that, reclaim that word, use it, do what in the same way that other people would with other words. So there is that level of like, maybe as an ally, if someone came on, you wouldn't say that to them unless they said it. And then you may still not ever say it, but you would let them do it, right? Like, because that's part of someone.
Right. We aren't calling somebody a dyke if they don't say, hey, listen, I identify. They would call me that because they've claimed that word for their power.
And even then you probably would never say it to them, but you would know like, oh, this person embraces that word as something that means something to them.
It teaches us something about them by how they identify themselves.
But it's funny, you said that word, and I realized that, my whole life I've all my friends have been gay men, and when I was younger, I was always called a fag hag, and nobody has called me that in years. I forgot about that term. I forgot that that's what I was called.
Wow.
It went away, but I totally forgot. But I never got a new name.
Well, what do we call her now? What do we call the girl? What do we call sis?
An old-fashioned gay hag. Now it's just a friend. It's not
just an ally, right?
Do we get over-identified?
But again, we still haven't answered my question. We keep chatting away. What do we call the community? Umbrella. How do we call it? What do we say? Like, how would you, like, if you were saying, I'm supportive of, I am an ally to.
As an ally, I probably would avoid the queer community because not everyone under there
has embraced it, right?
Right. And they're not going to embrace it. It may sound vulgar or derogatory to some people. I would probably stick with LGBTQ plus community.
Can I say everyone under the rainbow? Can I just say that, or is that not right?
Yeah. You're probably fine. Yes. Between that, like you see on TikTok, you see people say like, we're part of the alphabet mafia, which is a little bit of a joke, but it's also, they're saying like the LGBTQ plus community because the acronym's getting really long. That's what they're, it's kind of like a joke at it.
And that's why we wanted so badly to not be lazy about our understanding. It's obviously not the first conversation.
I'm going to say everyone under the rainbow, if I can, if that doesn't offend anybody.
I think it's cute.
I think it's cute too.
Okay.
At one point, it was going to be the name of our company.
I know.
We want to embrace, and we want to know the right way and respectful way to do it. And this conversation has been so incredibly helpful, and I feel like just the beginning of this conversation for our learning. And
I forgot to mention this. This is something that I would say like this a lot throughout this discussion. I've used the term identify. Right, this person identifies as that.
Yes, I use it too. Yeah.
To keep in mind with that is, let's say that you have a trans woman who comes on your show, and I don't know, we're making this person up. Her name is Diana, right? If she came on the show, you would not introduce her as, this is Diana. She identifies as a trans woman. It would just be, this is Diana. She's a trans woman.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Because it's the identity, the identifies portion of that is suggesting that in some way it's like an orientation or some sort of.
But I would say she's a trans woman. I wouldn't just say she's Diana.
But like specifically, if you're having a conversation around that, what I'm saying is like, if she came on your show and she was like, oh yeah, I'm a trans woman. That's, if you're introducing her, you just check in on that. Do you want us to say like, this is Diana.
Right.
She's so-and-so. She is a trans woman, or just like, do you want to? that's just a conversation to have. And maybe that's like the summary of this entire conversation is not being afraid to screw it up the first time. And then if you do screw it up, right, and someone corrects you and Diana says like, oh no, I don't use she, her, I use they, them.
Right.
Make the effort to respect that and use they, them, right? That's the summary, is that I don't think people should be afraid to screw it up. People make mistakes all the time and then you just learn from it.
Sometimes people get mad and I want to just say like, be patient because people are intimidated and it's not done because they don't love and respect you. It's done because they just fucked it up and they're trying, I hope people know that it's not meant to.
I think most people do when it's not like, if someone said to you, oh, well, my pronouns are she, her, and they told you that. And then again, you're like, he did this. Then they might be like, oh, my pronouns are she, her. And then it happens again. At some point it becomes like, do you not care enough?
Yeah, but if it happens again, you're a dick, or whatever. I mean, it's just don't be a dick. As Heather said, part of what we're talking about, and even a bigger umbrella, I think, rainbow, is that what we're asking people to do is have pride in who they are and being able to speak it, and that is such a difference from my history, where there was no pride in how you spoke, and that's why we had the March in Washington, to learn to be proud of who we are. And I think it's on the other side too. Learn to be curious, learn to ask questions, and be bold in yourself when you're not understanding something. That too is self-pride. And what's lazy is when you don't want to pay attention, you're not curious, and you're not respectful. So we want to combine that with the other side who's curious and say yes, ask questions. We're learning, and the more curious you are and respectful you are, nobody's going to get offended if you say, I'm sorry. Oh, listen, if you get it wrong one time and you go, you forgive me. Like, we're human beings. We want to learn this. We want to be in conversation and friendship. And it takes both sides to do that. And you have to take the risk to maybe not know, but respect the other person and yourself enough to ask, because it's respectful, kind, and loving.
One last question.
Where's the dick?
Dude's out? Dude's for everyone, right? I mean, I call everyone and anyone a dude.
No. Well,
what? Everyone's a dude.
You'd probably would have avoid it if you're really trying to not offend anyone. You would probably avoid it, right? Because it's the same as like I've been on Zoom calls where a professor will say like, "Hey guys," and then women in the class will say like, we're not all guys. And you can, even though like they're kind of making a joke, but they're also implying that like, but we're not all men. Do you know what I mean? Yeah. So I think there is some level of that. And certain people are more sensitive to things. So I used to do that a lot. And I had to work on it. So now it's usually like, hey all, is like, like, hello everybody.
Okay.
I think
I guess bro is out too.
You can call me bro. I think one of the things that oh God, I then got caught on bro. No, you were saying something and it was so specific. And
with Anne, you can use dude or bro.
Okay.
You can use dude or bro with me too. My pronouns are dude or bro. Okay. But I do like the dick.
All right, sis. Everybody listening out there, I think this is how we're going to wrap this up today with Sister.
Don't be a dick, and I do like the dick.
Oh, Lord. She doesn't learn very quickly. And so, Levi, we need to have you back immediately. We'll get dude over here to understand sis and sister. It is so cool to be learning and having this experience. You've wanted to do it for so long, Heather and Ryan. This was an exciting day. I apologize for my delays, and I'm just so grateful that you were here.
No, we really appreciate this. And I think that really what we've learned is that it's really individual, and it's really all about embracing everybody's individuality, which is really, really awesome, right?
That's the most awesome thing, and understanding and have compassion for the fact that we're learning as we go, and that everybody is in it together.
And it's right. It's like, it's really accepting everybody for their true and authentic self, and everybody should take the time to really to really make that effort. We should take the time to make that effort, and everybody should take the time to be patient with us and help us along the way. Like if you see
Let's
us
have a
struggle,
little bit of a
help
sense
us
of humor about it. That would go a long way. I know
Yeah.
certainly for teens, especially who are forming language. Atlas, he's 13. We want to be able to have a conversation that's open and not judgmental, and encourage. We can enjoy getting to learn these words and have forgiveness on both sides.
We really appreciate your time on
We
this.
so appreciate
Thank you,
your time.
Levi.
Thank you for making us better.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're better together with Anne and Heather.
Well, that was fantastic and as confusing as I thought it might
I
be.
think I
but
claimed myself as a
yeah.
he, she. I think the two of you were like, no, you're not. No, you're not. I'm like, he says, when you define yourself once, that's one thing. You can't be denied the second time. You three didn't let me be a he, she 3 times in a row. You're like, nope, that's not it. Nope, that's not it. I'm like, this was a learning experience, and I feel like I could do it all over again
Well, I'm
and
a
have
cis,
to listen to all of
sister.
you.
I'm
You
a
are a
cis.
cis. You are a cis, and shall I call you sis?
Well,
Honey.
I mean, cheers to Pride Month.
Yes.
And, here at Better Together, we embrace everybody for being their true and authentic self. And we also embrace everybody who accepts people
Yes.
for being their true and authentic self. And to
100%.
us, that's what Pride is. It's for all of us. It's for the allies as much as it is for people that live under the rainbow.
That's right. Oh, that's right. We love you guys. Thank you, Levi, for making us better together today.
And a big thanks to our Better Together team, Ryan Tillotson, Silvana Alcala, Daniel Ferreira, and of course, Ann and Heather. If you haven't already, please subscribe on whatever device or platform you're listening to this on. And as always, see you next week.